Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning AUKUS network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. AUKUS. Simply head to AUKUSnetwork.com for details.
John Bruni from Sage International has arrived. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Your coffee or tea is coming.
Oh, I am so glad to hear that because I need all the coffee I can get.
Okay, and the biscuits are on the table.
I will grab one.
A little sugar. Well, what can we unpack? I mean, there's a lot to unpack, isn't there? Ukraine. Let's start with the Ukraine.
Okay,
story.
So we have this notion that Trump is going to bring about a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So far, nothing of the sort has happened. Everything's in a bit of a holding pattern. The Ukrainian leadership is not happy with the outcome because they are now being forced effectively to submit to the will of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is desperately trying to get his mate Vladimir Putin to bend. The last conversation that Putin and Trump had, Putin gave nothing away, absolutely nothing. Because, of course, Putin wants to conquer. He wants to have the whole box and dice. So he's in a winning position. He's got his forces prepped and ready, and even though they're not decisively winning huge chunks of territory, they're pushing forward steadily along the eastern front, or along their western front, I should say.
Why did Trump talk himself into a corner by making himself out to be, the fixer and the doer of deals when Putin just ran rings around him, made him look silly?
Yes, narcissistic personality disorder is the only thing that I can come up with. I mean, there are deep psychological issues at play here. And I think that Trump just lacks the ability to look at the situation from any position of nuance. I mean, the very fact that he came to the table having given away everything before the negotiations with Putin even started was probably the height of stupidity in international relations. What accounts for that? Well, Putin likes strong men. He considers Vladimir Putin a strong man. They seem to have gotten on well because they both had the Russiagate thing together, as Trump had made mention about a week or so back. Oh, I like him because, we had to shoulder the same burdens and stuff like that. But you know what? Traditionally speaking, America and Russia are not friendly powers to each other. And there is a long history to back this thing up. Now, whether or not Trump is going to make the deal, I think that from what we are seeing so far, we are nowhere close to a deal. And his glib promise during his election last year where, I'm going to put an end to the war in one day. Well, I mean, if ever there was a heap of rubbish dumped onto the public, that was certainly it.
I'm just trying to think of the bordering Eastern European countries that today announced that they were upping their spending on defence.
Yes.
One of them is up to 5 or 6% of GDP.
Well, Poland will be they'll be crossing the threshold of 5 soon enough, but they are traditionally high defence spenders. And why are they high defence spenders, I hear you ask? Because they had their 60-odd years under Soviet occupation, and they have no desire to revisit that. The Baltic states the same, Romania the same. Hungary might be the outlier here, but if you talk to an average Hungarian who has the memory of 1956, I'm sure they don't want to see Soviet tanks rumbling through their streets anytime soon. So again, there is this deep and abiding fear of Eastern European countries against Russia. Now, I will tell you something. Our podcast has launched an episode today. We recorded with a Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who's been on Piers Morgan multiple times, and he's very much in the vogue of John Mearsheimer, who also is in vogue with Donald Trump's zeitgeist. So, all of them tend to blame America for everything. I mean, absolutely everything that has ever gone wrong was always on America's shoulders. They never give America credit for anything. Now, I'm a critic of the United States, but I think I'm a little bit more rationally based in that sense. But I think it was really important to get a pro-Russia and anti-America person onto the focus so we could actually unpack what they say in terms of, and it gave me an opportunity to push back because, Sachs and Mearsheimer, when they go off to Piers Morgan, I love watching Piers Morgan, don't get me wrong, but Piers Morgan, he takes a very light approach to this kind of matter. You know, he lets them have their say, but he doesn't push back, arguably because he doesn't know what to push back on. But I think that we succeeded in actually putting our foot down on a number of issues with Sachs. You know, so look, again, for those people who watch the sort of, I hate calling it, you know, there was a time many years ago when you said right or conservative, you meant a certain thing.
Yeah.
Now everything's been inverted. You know, the sky is green, the grass is blue, down is up is down.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand. I mean, I find myself now, on the left? I don't feel like I'm left. I don't think I left anything. I still think that I'm a hard right, offensive realist by international relations standards, and everyone else has shifted.
But if
And I
you
don't
go
get
far,
it.
if you go far enough right, you go round the back and become the left.
Look, yes, and look, you know, I think that maybe there's some truth to that, Jeremy. But obviously, I haven't moved that much.
No.
But I see that other people have moved 360, and it's like I don't live on a simple planet anymore. And really, I still maintain myself as an offensive realist who understands international power in, you know, both a theoretical and practical sense. But people like Mearsheimer and Sachs, who pretend to be realists, are always talking up Russia and bashing America. And it's like, well, that's not what a realist is meant to do. A realist is meant to be objective and just say, this is power, this is human nature, this is what's going to happen. Not, I favor this side, or I think that side's been wronged. You know, you don't do those kind of things.
What do you call the podcast again?
The Focus.
The Focus.
Yeah.
And you just go to wherever you get your podcasts from?
Yes, it's available at AUKUS Network.
Well, that's the one that looks
YouTube.
after us, yeah.
Yep. So YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, you can find it there. And look, honestly, for those people who are really interested in delving into matters of political controversy, it is going to be a corker of an episode.
Dr. John Bruni, ladies and gentlemen. That'll be up today, will it?
Yes, it will be up today.
Yep. What happened to the Ukraine agreement? The one that said if we give up our atomic weapons, our nuclear...
Oh, yes. The Budapest Agreement, or Memorandum, I should say, back in 92.
So we give up our weapons, and in exchange, you will give us protection. Sovereignty, yeah.
You're going to guarantee our sovereignty.
Yes.
Well,
What happened to that?
Well, that's gone up in smoke. And look, I don't know whether... See, here I'm more nuanced in my approach. I don't think that the Russians deliberately went out of their way initially to screw up the Ukrainians, because that was a long process that took many years to get to. We had the Yeltsin years initially after the Soviet Union broke up, and Yeltsin, as we all know, was a quote-unquote functional drunk and a fool, and played the fool on the international relations stage. I mean, I don't think that he ever knew what day it was. It didn't matter where he was in the world. He always looked like he was kind of flying around the place. So in that sense, would someone like that have a grasp over foreign policy? Would someone like that, think carefully about treaties? And no, they wouldn't. They just go ahead and drink another quart of vodka and, that'll be it. So, the Ukrainians, on the other hand, they also had their own governing problems. And back in the early days of Ukrainian independence, the governments were very pro-Russian and they were very corrupt, right? But give it sufficient time and space, things turned around in Kyiv to a point where I think that the Ukrainian authorities started to not trust the Russians in the way that they used to think that they could trust the Russians, because don't forget, Ukraine was a child of the Soviet Union. It spun out of the old Soviet Union. And many of the same sort of bits of politics floated around in Kyiv as it did in Moscow. But that changed quite dramatically when Zelensky came to office, because even at that stage, in 2014, just prior to the Maidan Revolution, there was the Russian snatch for Crimea. Now, for those listeners who know their history...
2014.
Yeah, for those people who know their history, Crimea was given, and this is a very strange act, and I'll never really quite understand why Khrushchev did this, but back in the 1960s, Khrushchev actually handed Crimea to the then Soviet Republic of Ukraine as a gift for, services rendered or their sacrifices during World War II, whatever it was. They gifted Ukraine. And in and among the Soviet state at that time, whatever passed for legalese, that was a watertight guarantee. It's like, okay, now Ukraine is yours. Keep Ukraine and enjoy the profits. Then when Ukraine became independent, the Russians thought to themselves, you know what, this deal was actually not a good deal. because our Soviet Navy, which is now the Russian Navy, is based in a place called Sevastopol, and Ukraine is now independent Ukraine, and it's not the Soviet Ukraine. So what are we going to do? We've got this conundrum. We need to get Crimea back somehow. So when Putin came to power, I think he was always of an opinion that Crimea, at the very least, has to come back into the Soviet orbit. And I think that from that calculation, and then 2014, when they actually snatched and grabbed Crimea away from Ukraine, I think it was at that time that Putin probably started thinking, well, the West didn't do too much, and we got Crimea. Let's see whether we can push for more. And it went from a political thing where demands were made and pressure was being placed. But then, the West started to think that there was something afoot. The Biden administration, I don't want to even talk about that one. But anyway, the Biden administration, the Johnson administration, government in the UK, they started backtracking. They started seeing that there might be something that we need to do to shore up Ukraine. And then, of course, we had February 2022, and the Russian tanks rolled over. Yeah. So, Putin literally declared his intentions of subjugating all of Ukraine to Russian will.
Do you see any solution? I mean, you've got these two terrible things happening in the world. You've got the Middle East, you've got the Gaza Strip and all of that, and you've got Ukraine. Is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Not for the moment. And I think that we have to be very rational. When we look at power is an instrument, and it gets wielded by people like Netanyahu, people like Putin, people like Trump, people like Macron, and else, in order for them to preserve what they consider the national interest. That's a very objective standpoint. I mean, I would probably say, if we go to the Middle East for a moment, while I can be very pro-Ukraine and very anti-Russian, I can also be very pro-Jewish but very anti-Netanyahu, because I think that Netanyahu's not doing the Jewish people any favor by not the war, but the way it's being prosecuted. Because let's face it, the kind of rise in anti-Semitism that's come up from quarters that are not traditionally known as being anti-Semitic, we know that they've always been the hard right, and then you've got the Muslim fundamentalists and all that kind of. They've always been the usual suspects in anti-Semitism. But now you're getting, ordinary Joe Sixpack starting to think and question about Israel because of all the devastating images that are on the 6 o'clock news with regard to Gaza. Or if you look at some of the ways that the IDF has been used in the West Bank, it's very repressive. And you kind of think to yourself, if Israel wants to be a normalized member of the Middle East, look, they had every right. I cannot stress it enough. They had every right to retaliate against the crimes that were committed on October 7.
Yeah.
But did they have to respond like this? And that...
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning AUKUS network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. AUKUS. Simply head to AUKUSnetwork.com for details.
It's a political decision that Netanyahu and his right-wing collaborators have concocted, and they're going to drag Israel into, well, let's face it, it's not going to be a good place.
Well, maybe, look, I'd like to make a few comments, John, based on a lot of things you've said this morning. And I think we have to go back to somewhat first principles and ask what precipitates conflict. And the precipitation of conflict, if you look at the United States and you look at traditional governments or administrations in the United States, where they've placed their involvement in other countries. Now, that might be in terms of military force, puppet regimes. There's a long list of those conflicts the United States has involved themselves in, and most of the time they haven't come up with a satisfactory outcome. It hasn't been a good outcome, and it's left a mess. If you look at, Jeremy and I were talking about this morning, if you look at in the wake of the Trump election and the new administration, versus Biden and the Democrats, the fur is flying, literally. It's like two cats in a fight. The fur is up in the air. Everyone's still growling at each other. There's conflict. People aren't happy about tariffs. People who are woke aren't happy about the changes in policy and direction.
But Trump is only doing what he said he was going to do.
Well,
everyone was told.
Look, as a sideline, I mean, Trump said he would release the documents on the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
Now everything has been released, and it appears that Oswald did it. Okay, the conspirators will still say differently, but in reality, I see Trump, and I see the wake of reaction from what he's doing to be fairly normal. People don't like the change from where they've been. If I look at Trump history in the Trump V1 and I look at conflict, say, North Korea, when Kim Jong-un was threatening to intervene with nuclear force, which is a pretty catastrophic way of conducting business, Trump got into the negotiation table. Singapore hosted it to the cost to the Singapore government $20 million. The Singapore government...
It's been quite a lunch.
Well, the Singapore government said, what does it cost for a 30-second ad on Super Bowl? $6 million. The Singapore government said, this is marvellous investment for us. $20 million is a drop in the ocean for them to put them on the world map, to host a convention like that. And the outcome was satisfactory.
We're all in the wrong business,
Now,
I think so.
We should get into the convention business.
Trump has been fairly consistent and uniform in his ambition to get people to a negotiation table. Now, whether people like the way he negotiates is questionable, and we could spend the rest of the morning talking about that because he has a particular style that doesn't necessarily appeal to most people. But he at least, when we talk about the Middle East, when we talk about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, he at least is one of the few who actually is saying, I don't want the war, I want peace, I don't want any more killing, I'm not going to supply the arms to the Ukraine. And in fact, in reality, many Australians would say Australia shouldn't be, I mean, while we can have a tacit verbal support of the Ukraine and their endeavour to be free and without conflict, to put legs on the ground in the Ukraine would not appeal to most Australians.
Let me ask John, what do you think about our military involvement at that level?
No, look, honestly, on this I will agree with Les, but I agree with you for different reasons. I think, to a degree, I would also want to go one step back as well and say, I understand what you're saying with regard to Trump, but I think that there's another backstory to it which I think doesn't get enough airtime, but we'll get to that in a minute. With regard to Australia, yes, tacit verbal agreement that, Ukraine is a sovereign country and we'd like to support it as best we can, and we have, and I think that that's great. I think it's marvellous.
We have, yeah.
But I think that we've also done so within our limits. Yeah. I think that doing more than what we're doing is not going to be good. And why is that? It's because we have no significant armed force to bring to the table. Now, I've had this discussion with a number of people who are in the know, quote unquote, in the military, and they say, but John, there are all sorts of peacekeeping missions that we can go on because, obviously there are people with itchy trigger fingers who just want to go out and see some action. And I say to myself, well, yeah, man, hang on a tick, mate. The fact is, we are having so many problems with the ADF in Australia, protecting Australia from China. Why would you now think that it's a good idea to send a penny packet force of people that we really can't afford to send to Europe for a potential battle with the Russians? Why not keep them close to home? Why don't we address the elephant in the room and say we need national service? Why not try to reform the Department of Defence and make it more efficient and effective? We can do a whole bunch of stuff that is good for the public, good for the country, good for the national interest, and then in the long term is going to be really just in the public good. But no one is prepared to go down that path. You speak to Dutton, you speak to Albanese, none of them have a clue about defence. Dutton only has brought one thing to the table, and I just tear my hair out with frustration, because it's like a 12-year-old boy's understanding of defence. Oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to buy some more aircraft. How much? $3 billion worth. How many? 28. So the next question is, great, go off and buy your 28 Joint Strike Fighters, flying bricks, in other words, and find the pilots and ground crew to run them, because I think that there's, memory serves me correct, a pilot shortage in the Royal Australian Air Force.
Bit of a problem.
So I think, you want to boost your Air Force. Buying weapons is not the way to go when you don't have the personnel necessary to sit in the cockpit.
Now, from what seemed to be unanimous approval, AUKUS looks like it's coming unstuck. I see quite often politicians, perhaps on the right in the coalition, more quietly, but certainly on the left in the Labor Party, they are talking about this useless deal, $360 billion submarines that we may never get delivered. And if they are delivered, they're going to be second-hand with American crews and under American control. Now, what do you think?
But every guest we've had here at the dining room table, Jeremy, who has had experience with the ADF.
Well, yeah.
And that includes our colleague from One Nation, Peter Bogatek, last Friday.
Yep.
And what we spoke to him about after the show was quite revealing, that the Australian Defence Force currently is just like a toothless tiger.
Yes.
And people like former Senator Bob Day have said, we don't have the manpower, they're not being trained, we don't have the resources, and people are saying this will never happen. Yeah. And we're building frigates down at Osborne now, and they're looking for a pay rise, like they're always looking for a pay rise, but I just wonder how efficient the whole operation is.
Well,
John's shaking his head.
John was involved at every level while the submarine decision was being made.
The initial one, yes.
Yeah. And what must we look like in the eyes of the world? We do one thing and then say, oh no, it costs us a fortune to get out of the French deal. So we're going down that track. No, we're not. So we have to pay millions or billions to get out of that. Mm-hmm. Why do we look so incompetent? Why can't we just make a decision, and preferably the right decision?
All right, well, okay, it's a complicated question, but I can try to simplify it by saying there are too many careerists within the ADF, especially in the flag officer levels. And when they're in there, they've got their six-figure salary, they've got a nice lifestyle in Canberra. They make like a Moanbat. They just dig in. And when they dig in, they become bottlenecks to a system that should be nimble and adaptive. So you end up having all these bureaucratic chains of command that are not flexible by any way, in any way, shape, or form. Whoever happens to be in charge of X will have their particular view. They may be at war with maybe another service. They may be at war with people within their own service, and they will act as obstacles to make things happen. So our over-bureaucratized, top-heavy military is a joke. It is a joke, and it has to be rectified. But until I find one candidate, and I would let's put down a challenge. That hasty fellow who's a former member of the SAS, who's got military experience, and I celebrate the fact that for once one of the political parties actually had someone who wore a uniform sitting in the defence portfolio, right? So I think great. Let him come forward and give an account of what the Liberal Party will do to help defend Australia, because I'm absolutely, as an Australian taxpayer, I am sick of hearing the same rubbish from the politicians who are too afraid of addressing the elephant in the room. Okay, we don't need Elon Musk here, but we do need a Musk-like person that can run the chainsaw, the metaphorical chainsaw through defence. We need to cut out a good percentage of the flag officers who are not doing anything. They're sitting in Canberra shuffling papers. They're not doing important stuff. They're not wargaming. They're not doing any of that stuff. They are keeping the bureaucracy going. They're cogs in the machine. And it is a career. You know what defence is meant to be? It is a calling. It's a vocation. You want to go and wear uniform. Even if you're a young man or a young woman for that matter, you want to wear the uniform, you want to do your patriotic duty for however long it is, say a national service term of 12 months, you do your thing, you come out, you've got better skills, you can re-engage with Civvy Street on a far more confident footing. There are so many benefits that come from this kind of thing, and yet not one politician from either side has a clue.
And look, I invite you to I refer to my comment earlier in the show about government being sloppy. And the sloppiness is as an illustration of, in the context of what we're talking about this morning, anti-Semitism and the sentiment against the Jews in Australia in particular. Albanese essentially and the government for 18 months have more been defending Gaza than they have been the other side, the Jewish side. And there's a large component of Jewish people in Australia and very wealthy and people who have been supporting the Labor Party. And that'll be interesting how that'll be different in the forthcoming election. But Albanese, as of the last couple of days, has completely changed his posture and the way his rhetoric and his argument about this subject. Where previously he was backward in not coming forward, now he's saying, I'm defending Israel and Israel's rights, etc., because he knows there's votes in it.
Of course.
Now, but this is a sloppiness of the government that when the problem was there 18 months ago, where was the correct rhetoric and the correct dialogue? It wasn't there. He let it slide, and he's now found it electorally unsatisfactory for him.
Look, Les, multiculturalism in this country is a poison, and I blame multiculturalism for the very fact that we can't just have an Australian opinion. We've got to have communitarian opinions. Each community needs to be represented in their views by a politician of one stripe or another, because as you're right, Jeremy, there are votes in it. There are votes. Okay? Yeah. It's that simple. So we cut up Australia into its little ethnic chunks. We shuffle things around. When it gets close to an election, we make a big drama about one thing or another, which favours either one side or favours the other. And in actual fact, those people who are here, and here I will be quite strong about this, Jew, Arab, Hindu, Muslim, I don't care. You're Australian when you're here. Yep. You've got a passport. You do what this country wants. You don't do what you want. This is the thing that's missing in this country.
But we just haven't told them that. We haven't given them the house rules when they arrived.
We don't want to. It's again one of those things. Yes. Softly, Jeremy. Softly. You know, eventually they'll come good. They'll come good. You know, the first one or two generations might be radicalized to one degree or another, but eventually they'll all come good. But the thing that we don't understand is that people that do not come from the traditional migration base of Australia, which sadly for the extreme left wing out there are European, when you're starting to recruit your migrant base from places in Africa, in the Middle East, doesn't matter what side you're on, or elsewhere, you end up having problems. And the process of integration is really then a multi-generational task. You're looking at about maybe the fourth, fifth generation of Australian who then forgets. And layer that with a complexity that we currently have on social media, where 50 years ago, the Italian migrant coming out to Australia had to write back home on a ship that took 4 weeks to get to Europe, and then they had to distribute the letter. That's another 2 weeks. So by the time news got from one side of the world to the other, it took so long that people just, you know...
and look, it goes
to... moved on.
But now you tweet, as soon as you're outraged, you tweet something, your cousin in Afghanistan listens to it and says, Allahu Akbar, I'm going to go out and blow something up. and this is the kind of... it's a funny thing, but it's also a tragic thing because... we're battling against two completely awful things. Multiculturalism as a political philosophy where everyone wants to divide and rule. And then we have social media where everyone with an opinion from whatever colour and stripe, just gets a mobile phone and starts saying stupid things.
Strange. It's not going to work. Let me take you back. To those interesting days when we were making up our mind about the submarines. Now, we had choice. We had Japan wanted, because I remember they were there that day at the convention centre where we had that...
Shinzo Abe's submarine men.
Yeah.
We caused a little bit of a stir, if you recall, because no one...
I shouldn't have mentioned Pearl Harbor. I know I shouldn't have.
Do not mention the war.
No. Okay, so we had the Japanese, we had the Swedish, the Germans, the French.
And the French.
Yeah. What else?
That was it at the time. Because
now then we put AUKUS in there.
Yep.
The American attack Virginia-class submarine, which is on the table now.
Wiped all the other contenders away.
Now, just tell me, before we take the 10 o'clock time signal, tell me, what should we have done?
Gone Japanese. Yes.
Okay, there you've heard it.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.